Hello, Malcolm here, Ventura Publications. Welcome to our latest video in the PR Spitfire story. After the PR Mark IV, the next generation of PR Spitfires was designed by installation of the new two-stage supercharged Merlin engine, the 60 series. The PR-4 had been a turning point in the history of PR Spitfires. From that variant on, the arrangement of cameras in the rear fuselage combined with the wet wing fuel tanks was the norm. From then on, development followed the path of fighter versions with ever more powerful engines fitted to improve performance, especially service ceiling and top speed, in order to keep ahead of the latest German fighters. So, when development commenced of the new fighter version Spitfires powered by the Merlin 60 series engine, PR versions were a natural extension. The RAF had envisaged two new fighters, the very high altitude Mark VII with pressurized cockpit and the unpressurized Mark VIII. Both were to have dedicated reconnaissance variants, and to move things along, in April 1942 an order was placed for 70 PR aircraft based on the F Mark VIII and powered by the Merlin 61 engine. This design became the PR Mark XI. In the meantime, the pressurized PR variant derived from the Mark VII was designated the PR Mark X. Prolonged development of the pressurized cockpit caused delays in the F Mark VII and the PR-X program. Work on the F Mark VIII, which was to feature a substantially redesigned and strengthened fuselage, was also falling behind schedule. And quite rapidly, the first production Spitfire with a 60 series Merlin became the F Mark IX, a simple modification of the Mark V fighter. For the PR role, not subjected to the excessive forces of dogfighting, there was no need for major structural strengthening, so a decision was taken to develop the PR-XI from the fighter Mark IX by incorporating the necessary PR equipment as well as some design refinements intended for the Mark VIII, such as the retracting tail wheel. Before the PR-XIs were manufactured, a number of fighter Spitfire Mark IXs were modified by simply removing their guns and installing cameras like those in the PR Mark IV. At least 3 existing Spitfire Mark IXs were equipped with camera systems during October 1942 by Vickers Armstrong Worthy Downs facility. The first of these, BS-338, was delivered to number 541 Squadron at Benson on the 30th November 1942, and on that very first day it flew a mission over France to Boulogne. Probably these 3 conversions featured the enlarged oil tank under the nose, but we can't be certain of that. However, they did lack the wet wing and employed drop tanks to extend their range. These aircraft were designated PR Mark IX. Due to delays with the PR-XI, 15 PR-IXs were eventually created as conversions from F Mark IXs. Apparently, a single PR-4 EN263 was modified to PR Mark IX standard, although with its wet wing it was actually a unique aircraft. The most famous PR-IX mission involved preparations for No. 617 Squadron's famous Dambuster raid against the Ruhr dams. In January 1943, reconnaissance was carried out with maximum secrecy to avoid anything that might raise suspicion on the German side. Later, on the 15th of May 1943, Flying Officer F.G. Frey took the last pictures of the Mona, Sorpe and Eder dams in a PR-9 prior to the Dambusters raid, which took place on the night of May the 16th-17th. In the early morning of May the 17th, just 8 hours after the raid, Frey was there again to photograph the results. Eventually, all these PR-9s were converted and upgraded to PR-XI standard. Production of true PR-XIs suffered another delay owing to a dispute over RAF PR doctrine. Because the new PR Mark XI Spitfire was already behind schedule, the Air Ministry proposed in early 1943 that all PR squadrons convert to de Havilland Mosquitoes. After analysing the situation, the air staff agreed that the Mosquito could perform 90% of missions, so Spitfire production was only required for 10% of PR units. At that stage, however, Air Marshal Slessor, head of Coastal Command, which controlled the PR units, entered the argument. He pointed out that the Spitfire was smaller than the Mosquito, used half the number of Merlin engines, was faster, more manoeuvrable and quieter, so he felt production should be increased, not decreased. The air staff finally decided that PR.11 production should be accelerated at the cost of reduced production of fighter Spitfires. This explains why true PR.11 production was commenced by cannibalizing complete Mk IX airframes. These true PR.11s featured the wet wing tanks like the PR.4 and a 14.4 gallon oil tank in a chin similar to the PR Type F. If you haven't already seen it, I'd suggest taking a look at our video on the early PR Spitfires, which includes information about the PR Type F. Okay, it's time to talk about the new engines. A 60 series Merlin, either 61, 63 or 63A, was fitted to 260 aircraft, and the even higher altitude rated Merlin 70 was fitted to 211 PR.X 11s. In all cases, these were driving a 4-blade Rotol propeller. The Spitfire Mk 11 was the first PR variant to be equipped with a -G resistant carburetor as standard. All the Merlin 70 series powered aircraft, and 198 of those with 60 series Merlins, were fitted with a Volks Aero V dust filter, which could be easily recognized by the larger and longer carburetor air intake. All those with 60 series engines featured a fuel cooler in the port wing leading edge. One point to note is that the higher fuel consumption of the more powerful engine resulted in the Spitfire PR.11's maximum range being 1,360 miles, a reduction compared to that of the PR.4. The layout of the fuselage camera bay was now known as the Universal Photographic Installation, and for the first time an option of 2 f/52 cameras with 36-inch focal length lenses was possible. Those PR.11s used for tactical reconnaissance featured an additional camera under each wing. The usual photographing technique with vertical cameras was an approach to the target as if to miss it by a small distance, then make a 90-degree turn to fly over the target and take the first photos, then make another 90-degree turn to check the aircraft's position relative to the target line and set up for another photo run, the process being repeated as required. When taking photographs with a fuselage oblique camera, the pilot would fly parallel to the target line, and with the target visible behind the wing, the aiming system was to look through a black crosshairs sight painted on the canopy, and then out across the wing there would be white marks painted on the port aileron. During 1943, Spitfire PR.11s replaced the PR.4 in Britain. During early operations, an unexpected problem was encountered, one that had not occurred in previous PR Spitfires. This was cockpit canopy icing. The external surface would ice up during starboard turns when vapor from the air compressor cooling duct was directed straight onto the canopy. No modification was necessary, however, since the ice would soon come off after setting a straight course. Much more dangerous was the internal icing, which tended to build up during long flights at altitude. From the PR.4 onwards, the cockpit was heated by hot air from the engine cooling radiators. The system worked perfectly in the earlier Spitfires, but in the PR.11, when flying at optimum cruising speed, it refused to build up enough heat. The reason turned out to be quite simple, in that the PR.11, like all Merlin 60s and 70 powered aircraft, featured a more complex cooling system. When the engine was running at low revs, a single radiator section was enough to cool the engine, so a thermostatic switch was installed to turn off the starboard radiator under such conditions. By an unfortunate oversight, the starboard radiator was the one that fed the cockpit with its warm air. After pilot complaints, the thermostatic switch was moved to the port side and comfort was restored. 1943 brought about reorganization within the RAF as preparation for the liberation of Europe gathered pace, and this affected the PR units. I may do a video about this at a later time. However, this is where we leave our story about PR Spitfire Mark XI development, and now we'll look at the nuts and bolts of the design of this aircraft. Now we'll cover the fuel and oil tanks in the PR-XI. For the fuel tanks, they were the same as the PR Mark IV. So we had the forward upper tank, we had the forward lower tank for a combined capacity of 85 gallons, and we had the two wet wing tanks with their additional 133 gallons. We also had the oil tank in the nose chin area for 14.4 gallons of oil. If need be, the PR-XI could also carry an external drop tank. Here's a photograph of a PR-XI in the Far East, and it is carrying a 90-gallon slipper tank under its center section. In my PR4 video, I didn't include a top plan illustration showing the extent of the wing fuel tanks, so here is such an illustration, and the tanks go from the wing frame 4 all the way out to wing frame 21, which is right out of the tip. Now here's the detail of the wingtip, and we can see an extra filler cap, a float vent cap, and these little overflow pipes that allow excess fuel to blow out rather than literally blow up the wing tanks. And here is a really interesting photograph. It shows a PR Mark XI out in the Far East fueled to the absolute max. You can see the fuel seeping out of the forward fuselage top tank, and you can see fuel that has seeped out of these little overflow pipes. Now once in the air above 20,000 feet, the fuel tanks will be pressurized to 5 psi. Here we have some interesting things on screen. We've got the undersurface of the aircraft that shows the 8 hand holes in blue through which the workers assembled the wet wing. They had to get their hand through into these holes so as to rivet the inside of the wet wing correctly. And I've also got a scrap view showing the extent of the fuel tank beside the illustration in blue from the maintenance manual. I'm just going to enlarge the undersurface view. We're now taking a closer look at the teardrop fairing that is housing the fuel pump on Merlin 70 powered, later manufactured aircraft. This last illustration is a simplified version of what's in the maintenance manual covering the fuel pumps that service the Merlin 70 engine. Some PR-XIs included a desert survival kit. This was fitted beneath a panel under the starboard wing. The kit included 2 3/4 gallon bottles of water, some tools, and a flare pistol. Okay, now we're going to talk about the camera setup. The PR-XI used the so-called U, or Universal Photographic Installation. This set of bracketry, I suppose you'd call them, could carry the 3 W, X and Y configured camera sets, which were what the PR4 used, plus for the first time an option was available to fit 2 f/52 cameras with 36-inch focal length lenses. These were 2 big cameras. They were mounted split left and right by 5 degrees and 20 minutes from the vertical, and this resulted in a 60% overlap in the photos taken by the 2 different cameras. Now we're looking at the twin installation of the f/52 cameras from the port side. Now we are taking a look at those same 2 cameras from the starboard side. Now we're looking at the scale drawings taken from the 1945 book Evidence in Camera. So this shows line art of the cameras and also a view from behind, showing the split in the two cameras left and right. Before we move on, this is a really interesting document. It's a data card used to calculate the number of exposures required at any given height and speed to achieve the 60% image overlap that the photo analysts were seeking. And you'll notice in the bottom left of this document it mentions heights, and the highest height spoken about, or written about rather, is 45,000 feet. Two more things to look at before we move on to the in-wing cameras. This is the universal camera set's camera warming system with the air pipe from radiators to the cameras. Now we're looking at the ports in the belly of the aircraft through which the camera is pointed, and next we have a later variation of these ports with extra reinforcing around those ports. This underside plan view shows the location of the camera ports in the aircraft's belly. Now we move on to in-wing cameras. Twin in-wing F-24 5-inch cameras were fitted to some later PR-11s. These cameras occupy the space between ribs 9 and 12 behind the main spar, in the space often used for the stowage of tropical or desert equipment. Each camera was carried on a modified Type 45 camera mount supported on wooden wedges so as to achieve a 10-degree outward splay. I've color-coded the camera drive motors in green, and you can see the flexible cable drives leading to the camera. Now here we've got two plans from above and in front showing the layout of the cameras, and we can see the warmer pipes. They are color-coded in purple, and again the drive motor is in green. And in the front-on view we can see the outward splay of the cameras. Here's some extra information about the oblique-mounted F-24 cameras with 14-inch lens that could be mounted in the PR-11. Now these first photographs show a mounting within a Russian PR-4, but the installation is the same. Then we move into a photograph of the inside of the starboard side little hatch through which the cameras could be serviced and accessed. And above that we see in black and white line art the exterior of the starboard side of the fuselage in that area. Our main photo here is of a Norwegian PR-11 in the post-war period, and on the ground beside it is an F-24 camera with the 14-inch lens. Now we've arrived at the cockpit and camera controls section. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stream out these photographs so that they are slow enough so you can get a good look, and from time to time I will interrupt the background music and hopefully make some useful comments. This is the Type 35 camera controller in the position where generally a fighter aircraft would have its sight. Now we're looking at the camera operating button, which is on the end of the throttle lever. These are the camera selection switches. And this is the throttle quadrant, and the camera button is actually on the end of the throttle lever, as I pointed out before. The starboard side of the cockpit in a PR.11. These illustrations are all from the pilot's notes. This illustration is of the main fuel cock controls in a PR.11. These color cockpit photos are of the PR.11 in the US Air Force Museum. The PR.11's pilot oxygen system. And here's the PR.11 windscreen, and for the sliding part of the canopy you can see the little notches in the rail, so the pilot can have the sliding canopy in various partially open positions. Windscreen from the starboard side. And we finish off this video with the control column locked in position. It's a good angle in this photo. It gets tight up under the rim of the cockpit. Thanks for watching. Hope you've hit the like and subscribe button already, and if you'd like to, you can buy me a coffee by going to the channel's main page and clicking the link. Bye for now.